This video demonstrates the function and testing of crank and cam position sensors. So getting into it here, you can see we have a diagram pulled up for an 18 Hyundai Tucson. We're going to start off with the crank position sensor. And as you can see there, it's a 2-wire variable reluctance sensor. So it's going to generate its own electricity as the reluctor wheel spins past the sensor. And the signal wire on that one is gray. So we're going to show you a little bit about that here on the car now. So now we're actually looking at the sensor on the car, and this one was on the front side of the bottom of the block near the transmission bell housing, and you can see here shortly it runs up to a connector that we were back probed into to look at the signal on the pico scope, and here I'm going to demonstrate how you can easily test these variable reluctance sensors using the ohm function on a multimeter. Because this is a variable reluctance 2-wire sensor, a good quick way to test it is by ohming out the coil of that sensor. So I have the connector unplugged and I'm probed into the leads on that sensor. You can see we're reading about 1,000 ohms, and you know, every car and sensor is going to be a little bit different for the specifications, but you know, let's say, you know, it's reading OL or 2 ohms, or you know, something that's presumably out of specification. It's pretty quick and easy way to tell if that sensor is good or bad. So while we were looking at the signals for these sensors on the pico scope, we had both the cam sensor signals and the crank sensor signal up at the same time. So I thought I'd throw up the diagram again and just talk a bit about the cam position sensors. So you can see we have 2 on this car, one for the intake and one for the exhaust cam. And these produce a digital signal, so it's going to be fluctuate up and down from 0 and 5 volts as that reluctor spins past the sensor. And you can see for number 1 the signal wire is red, and for number 2 the signal wire is black and gray. Okay, so now you can see we're actually on the car looking at the sensors. We got the cam position sensor number 1, which is the intake cam, and sensor number 2, the exhaust cam. Like I said before, these are a 3-wire digital sensor. We are back probed into the signal wires on both of them for the scope, and we're also probed into the 2-wire variable reluctance crank sensor for the scope. And this car was idling a second ago, and I just I paused the scope and shut the car off so you could actually hear me. But here you can see this is the analog signal for the crank, and these are the digital signals for both the cams. And you can see that, you know, this is just pulling it up to either 5 volts or ground, and this is generating its own electricity. So as that reluctor wheel passes the sensor, it basically makes its own electricity, and that's fluctuating between 1.8 and 2.8 volts around. And obviously this is all going to change with RPM, as we'll demonstrate later. Alright, the computer is pretty slow, but I'm going to have Anton rev the car up a little bit, and we'll see if we can, you know, get a good look at the scope. So you can see how dense and how tall that's getting. Well, these are getting much more dense, and it's not going to get as dense as the crank because obviously the cams are spinning half the speed, but that's what it looks like on the scope. So just to explain a little better what the PCM is looking for, the crank signal, those missing teeth are going to tell it, you know, if it's on a number of degrees before top dead center on most likely cylinder 1. It just depends on the car, but it doesn't know if it's on the compression or exhaust stroke, so that's when it's going to look to the cam signal. And you can see where those missing teeth are. It's either a high signal or it's a low signal on both of them, so that's going to tell the PCM whether it's on the compression or exhaust stroke. and when to fire those injectors and when to fire the plugs. Okay, so Anton here, he unplugged the connector. He's gonna unplug the connector for the crank sensor, and we're gonna see if the car is gonna start. Assuming not, because it's not gonna detect any RPM. Yeah, we got nothing. Now we're gonna plug back in the crank sensor and unplug the cam sensors and see if it starts. And I think it's still not gonna start, because on startup usually it has to detect if it's on compression or exhaust to fire, the injectors and the plugs. But I think we'll see while it's running. If we unplug the cam sensors, it'll probably still run because the PCM has that memorized. You got the cam unplugged?
I got both of them. Yep.
Both of them? All right. And we're gonna see if it starts with both the cam sensors unplugged, but the crank is plugged back in. It's trying, but nope, we ain't got nothing.
I'm gonna plug in the intake can.
All right, plug in both of them, and we'll start it. And now I want to see if it'll die when we unplug them. I think it'll keep running. Okay, so now the car's running. They're both plugged in. Anton over there is gonna unplug the cam sensors.
Both are now disconnected.
Yep, they're both unplugged. It's still running, so the PCM had enough time to memorize the position. Yeah, unplug the crank. It'll kill it. Yep. Now we wanted to demonstrate how the digital sensors are good at reading even at low or no rotation, and the variable reluctance sensor at slow rotations or no rotations isn't going to show anything because it needs to be spinning to generate that electricity. So we're having Anton here bar the engine over the keys forward to power up those sensors, and the cams right now are at 5 volts, and we should see, once he rotates that over enough, they should, drop down to about 0. And there we go. Cam number 1 dropped to 0, and there's 0 fluctuation in the crank. You see here at some point cam number 2 should drop to 0. Oh, there it goes. Yeah, that's just a quick demonstration of that.